Our planet's resources are finite, yet our global economy demands ever more. Today, we'll confront the critical challenge of resource scarcity and explore innovative solutions for sustainable management. We'll examine how to balance the need for economic growth with the imperative of protecting our environment for generations to come. Stay tuned and stay safe.
Welcome to our deep dive into the complex world of resource scarcity and sustainability. Um, it's a topic that's both fascinating and, if we're being honest, pretty daunting.
What I find really intriguing is how interconnected it all is. We're talking about everything from like the water you drink to the stability of entire economies, even global geopolitics.
Yeah, the sources we have here paint a pretty alarming picture, I guess you could say. Reports from the UN warn that global resource consumption has tripled in the last 50 years, and get this, could surge by another 60% by 2060. And that's just one example. We've got articles on AI predicting floods in Southeast Asia, historical analyses of deforestation in Indonesia. Yeah. It feels like we're on the edge of this massive tipping point.
I think that's a really good way to put it. It's like we're trying to balance the needs of this constantly growing global economy with the very real limits of our planet's resources. And the stakes are high. Think about the 1997-1998 Southeast Asian haze crisis. A really powerful example of what can happen when unsustainable practices kind of collide with a changing climate.
Okay, so let's try to unpack this a little bit. Can you give us a working definition of resource scarcity? And why should our listener in Southeast Asia even care about any of this?
Well, resource scarcity basically means we're using up resources faster than the Earth can replenish them. Take the shrinking Aral Sea, for example. It was once the world's fourth largest lake, and now it's almost completely dried up due to unsustainable irrigation practices.
Wow.
Or, closer to home, think about the strain on water resources in densely populated Java.
Right. And those examples you just gave, they're not just abstract environmental issues, right?
Yeah.
They have real-world consequences on people's lives.
Absolutely. Things like water scarcity can lead to food shortages, economic instability, even social unrest. And it's not just water we need to worry about. We're also seeing scarcity in critical minerals needed for things like smartphone and all of the renewable energy technologies we're trying to build.
So this impacts everything from our daily lives to the larger geopolitical landscape.
Exactly. And we can't forget about climate change. Climate change is like throwing fuel on the fire, right? More frequent droughts in Southeast Asia are impacting agricultural yields, so that's less food. And extreme weather events are displacing millions of people, as we saw back in 2019. It's this complex web of interconnected challenges.
It sounds pretty overwhelming, to be honest. So what's being done to counteract all of this? Are there any reasons for optimism amidst all this doom and gloom?
There are, actually, and a lot of our sources highlight a bunch of different solutions and strategies being implemented around the world. One of the most promising, in my opinion, is the concept of a circular economy. That's where we move away from the traditional linear model of take, make, dispose, and towards a system where we minimize waste and maximize resource use.
So instead of just throwing things in a landfill, we're talking about finding ways to reuse, repair, or recycle them.
Exactly. There are companies out there, like Dipley, that are refurbishing and reselling smartphones to give these devices a second life. And even IKEA is designing furniture with the circular economy in mind, using more renewable and recycled materials. It's about rethinking the entire life cycle of products.
That's really encouraging to hear. But what about those bigger systemic changes we need, like our dependence on fossil fuels, for instance?
Yeah, well, the transition to renewable energy is absolutely crucial. There's no doubt about that. And we're seeing some promising trends. For example, China has already exceeded its 2030 renewable energy targets, primarily through investments in solar and wind power.
That's impressive. But I'm imagining a place like Southeast Asia, with its diverse geography and developing economies, faces a whole other set of unique challenges when it comes to adopting renewables, right?
You're absolutely right. But I'd say there are also some unique opportunities. This region has immense potential for hydropower, and we're seeing some really cool initiatives pop up, like small hydropower projects in Indonesia. They're bringing electricity to these remote communities that have never had it before. It's all about finding the right mix of solutions for each specific context.
Okay, so we've got circular economies, we've got renewable energy. What other strategies are being explored?
Another area that's getting a lot of attention is the use of AI to optimize resource use. Google, for example, has developed this flood prediction system that's being used in Southeast Asia. It uses artificial intelligence to predict when and where floods are likely to occur, which gives communities valuable time to prepare.
So technology is being used as a powerful tool for mitigating the risks of resource scarcity and climate change.
Absolutely. But it's not just about high-tech solutions. Sometimes the most effective solutions are the simplest ones. Wangari Maathai, who founded the Greenbelt movement, once said, "When we plant trees, we plant the seeds of peace and hope."
Planting trees, huh? That's something anyone can do.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that sustainable resource management isn't just about grand schemes and technological innovations. It's about individual actions, community initiatives, and kind of a fundamental shift in how we view and relate to the natural world.
So it's about changing our mindset, not just our technologies.
You got it. And that shift in mindset is starting to happen. We see consumers demanding more sustainable products. Businesses are realizing that sustainability can actually be good for the bottom line. And governments are starting to enact policies that incentivize sustainable practices.
It sounds like there's a growing awareness that we're all in this together, that our actions have a ripple effect. But let's be honest, there's still a huge gap between awareness and action. What are some of the biggest hurdles we face when it comes to actually implementing these solutions?
Well, one of the biggest challenges is the tension between economic development and environmental protection. Many countries in Southeast Asia are still working to lift people out of poverty and achieve economic growth. And sometimes those goals seem to clash with environmental sustainability.
It's like that classic jobs versus the environment debate.
Right, but framing it as an either-or situation is kind of misleading. Environmental degradation ultimately undermines economic stability. Think about the costs associated with pollution, natural disasters, and resource depletion. Those costs are enormous.
So it's not just about saving the planet for ethical reasons. It's about protecting our economies and livelihoods, right?
Exactly. And some of the sources we have highlight some interesting approaches to bridging this gap. Take the concept of green growth, for instance. It focuses on decoupling economic development from resource depletion. A good example is the renewable energy sector, which is creating millions of new jobs worldwide while reducing our reliance on fossil fuels.
So it's about finding ways to grow our economies sustainably without trashing the planet in the process.
You got it. That's the goal. But it's not always easy. The transition to a greener economy requires upfront investments, new infrastructure, and, just a willingness to challenge the status quo. And there's always that risk of greenwashing, where companies or governments make misleading claims about their environmental practices.
So it's about holding people accountable and demanding transparency.
Absolutely. And another hurdle is the issue of equity. Resource scarcity often exacerbates existing inequalities. The poorest and most vulnerable communities are often hit hardest by things like water shortages, pollution, and climate change impacts.
So this isn't just an environmental issue, it's a social justice issue too.
Exactly. So now the question becomes, how do we ensure a just and equitable transition to a more sustainable future? How do we avoid leaving anyone behind? These are questions we need to be asking ourselves. And that kind of leads us to another critical dimension of this conversation, the role of history. Understanding the historical context can help us make sense of the challenges we face today.
Okay, let's delve into that. How has history shaped Southeast Asia's relationship with its resources?
Well, the legacy of colonialism, for one, has left a long-lasting impact. During the Dutch colonial era, for example, Indonesia's natural resources were heavily exploited for export crops and timber. And this, unfortunately, set a precedent for resource extraction that we still see influencing the region.
So it's about understanding how past patterns of exploitation continue to shape the present.
Right. And then you have the Green Revolution, which, while it did increase food production, also led to a heavy reliance on chemical fertilizers and pesticides. This has had long-term consequences for soil health and water quality.
So even well-intentioned initiatives can have unintended consequences.
That's a crucial point. It underscores the importance of taking a long-term perspective. Sustainable resource management isn't about quick fixes, it's about making choices that will benefit both present and future generations.
It's about thinking beyond the immediate and considering the ripple effects of our actions.
Exactly, and I think that brings us to a good place to pause for now. We've covered a lot of ground, from the stark realities of resource scarcity to the glimmers of hope offered by innovative solutions and this growing awareness of the need for change.
But this is just the beginning. In part 2 of our deep dive, we're going to explore some specific case studies and real-world examples of sustainable resource management in action. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to our deep dive into sustainable resource management. In part 1, we tackled the big picture, the challenges of resource scarcity, the urgent need for sustainable practices, and kind of the historical context that shapes our relationship with resources.
Yeah, it was a lot to cover.
Yeah.
And now it's time to zoom in and explore some real-world initiatives that are putting these ideas into action.
Yeah.
Get out of the theoretical and into the practical.
Okay, I'm ready for some inspiring examples. Where should we start?
Well, remember Nescafé? I talked about them a bit earlier. Their regenerative agriculture initiatives in Indonesia and Mexico really stood out to me. Right, you mentioned that. But just to refresh everyone's memory, what exactly is regenerative agriculture?
Basically, it's a holistic approach to farming that focuses on rebuilding soil health, increasing biodiversity, and enhancing those ecosystem services. So instead of depleting the land, the goal is to regenerate it.
So it's like the opposite of those intensive farming practices that rely so heavily on chemical fertilizers and pesticides.
Exactly. Those conventional methods often end up degrading the soil and having a negative impact on the environment, which is what we're trying to avoid. Nescafé is working with coffee farmers to implement practices like planting cover crops, composting, and reducing tillage.
And what kind of results are they seeing from all this?
The results so far are pretty impressive. They're seeing improvements in soil fertility, water retention, and even carbon sequestration. These practices are helping to make the farms more resilient to climate change impacts as well.
It's a win-win, right? Both for the environment and the farmers' livelihoods.
Exactly. And it's encouraging to see a major corporation like Nescafé actually taking the lead on something like this. It shows that sustainable practices can be scaled up and integrated into global supply chains, which is what we need.
It's a good sign that consumer demand for sustainably produced goods is starting to influence how these big companies operate.
Yeah, consumers have a lot more power than they think. Okay, switching gears completely for a second, let's talk about Singapore's 2030 climate plan. I'm always fascinated by what they're doing over there, considering their limited land and dense population.
Yeah, they have to be incredibly resourceful. And their 2030 climate plan is nothing if not ambitious. A 20% reduction in emissions by 2030, that's a big goal.
It's a serious commitment, for sure. And they're not just focusing on one thing, they're taking a multi-pronged approach, focusing on energy efficiency, carbon capture, and importing renewable energy.
So it's like a combo of reducing their own emissions and finding sustainable sources beyond their borders.
Right. They've actually set a target of importing 30% of their energy from low-carbon sources by 2035.
Wow, that's pretty bold. But how are they going to pull that off, given all the complexities of cross-border energy trade?
It's definitely not simple, but they're actively pursuing partnerships to make it happen. Remember those regional energy grid initiatives we talked about earlier? Well, projects like the Laos Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore Power Integration Project are trying to connect countries with surplus renewable energy to those with high demand.
Oh, right. So it's creating a more interconnected and resilient energy system across the entire region.
Exactly. It's a great example of how regional cooperation can really drive that transition to a cleaner energy future.
It shows that what might seem like a purely national issue, like energy independence, can actually be tackled more effectively through collaboration.
Absolutely. Now let's look at an example of technology being used to address resource scarcity, Google's AI flood prediction system.
Oh, yeah, that one was really interesting. It sounds like something straight out of a science fiction movie.
I know, right? It does feel pretty futuristic. But it's a real-world application of AI that's having a real impact. They've deployed this technology in Spain and Brazil and are now adapting it for Southeast Asia. It analyzes huge amounts of data to predict when and where floods are likely to occur.
So it's like an early warning system for floods, but powered by AI.
Exactly. And the benefits are huge. Early warnings can give communities time to prepare, to evacuate if necessary, and take steps to minimize damage. It can literally save lives and reduce those economic costs of flooding.
It's a perfect example of how cutting-edge tech can build resilience in the face of climate change impacts.
It really highlights the power of data and information in managing resources sustainably. By having access to accurate real-time data, we can make smarter decisions.
Okay, I want to touch on another area where technology is changing the game: lab-grown materials. It's an area that's getting a lot of attention these days, especially in the food industry.
Yeah, lab-grown meat is definitely having a moment. It's still early days, but the potential is huge.
It does sound very futuristic. Can you give us a quick rundown of how it works?
Sure. So Scientists are using cell cultures to grow meat in a lab without actually needing traditional animal agriculture. They take a small sample of animal cells and basically provide them with the nutrients they need to grow and multiply.
So no farms, no slaughterhouses, just meat grown in a petri dish.
It's a bit more complicated than that, but that's the basic idea. The goal is to create meat that's indistinguishable from conventionally produced meat, but with a much smaller environmental footprint.
So that environmental aspect is really the key selling point here, right?
It is. Think about all the problems with traditional animal agriculture. It's a major contributor to deforestation, greenhouse gas emissions, and water pollution. Lab-grown meat could drastically reduce all of those impacts. It could also address concerns about animal welfare and food security.
So it's a potential solution to a whole bunch of problems.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing there are still some hurdles to overcome before this becomes mainstream.
For sure. The cost of production needs to come down, and there are still some technical challenges. And of course, there's always the question of consumer acceptance. Some people might be, well, hesitant to eat meat that was grown in a lab.
Yeah, I could see that. It seems like a big leap for a lot of people.
It does. But as the technology improves and the benefits become clearer, I think more and more people will be open to the idea. It's a great example of how human ingenuity can come up with solutions to problems that seem impossible to solve.
It feels like we're on the edge of a food revolution.
It really does. Okay, let's switch gears again and talk about another set of solutions that are gaining a lot of traction, nature-based solutions. These approaches harness the power of nature to address all sorts of environmental challenges.
So things like planting trees, restoring wetlands, and protecting natural ecosystems.
Exactly. And what's great about nature-based solutions is that they often provide multiple benefits. For example, restoring mangroves along coastlines not only protects communities from storms and sea level rise, but it also creates habitats for marine life and helps to sequester carbon.
So it's about working with nature, not against it. That's a theme that keeps coming up.
It's a core principle of sustainable resource management, I'd say, and there are so many incredible examples of this in action. Take the Greenbelt movement in Kenya, for example. They've planted millions of trees and restored all this degraded land, all while empowering women in these communities.
It shows that environmental action can be a powerful force for positive social change.
I totally agree. And then there's Costa Rica, a country that's made biodiversity conservation central to its national identity. They've made incredible progress in protecting their rainforests and developing sustainable agriculture practices.
It's a good reminder that economic development and environmental conservation don't have to be at odds with each other.
They can totally go hand in hand. All right, we've explored a lot of diverse solutions here. What are some of the common threads, the key insights we can pull from all these examples?
That's a great question. I think one thing that really stands out is the importance of collaboration between governments, businesses, communities, and even across national borders.
That's so important. We've seen how regional energy grids, for example, can facilitate the sharing of renewable energy. And initiatives like the Mekong River Commission are tackling the complexities of transboundary water management.
So it's about recognizing that these environmental challenges often transcend political boundaries.
Yeah, and acknowledging that working together is the only way to find solutions that benefit everyone.
Another big takeaway for me is the importance of innovation, whether it's developing cutting-edge technologies like those AI-powered flood prediction systems, or pioneering new approaches to food production like lab-grown meat. Human ingenuity is playing a vital role in all of this.
It's all about being willing to challenge the status quo and explore those unconventional solutions. And we can't forget about the power of individual action either. While systemic change is super important, each of us can make choices that contribute to a more sustainable future.
Right, whether it's supporting businesses that prioritize sustainability or making more conscious choices about what we buy and how we consume, we all have a role to play.
Absolutely. Now, I think it's time to move on to the final part of our deep dive. We're going to explore some insights and thought-provoking quotes from leading thinkers in this field.
Ooh, I love hearing from the experts. Let's see what wisdom they have to share. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive on sustainable resource management. We've explored the challenges, some potential solutions, and all the inspiring examples of people who are out there already making a difference.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground. And in this last section, we're going to shift our focus to the insights of some leading voices in the field. They have these really interesting perspectives that can challenge our assumptions and inspire us to think differently about these issues.
Okay, I'm ready to hear what they have to say. Who should we start with?
Let's start with Wangari Maathai. She was a Kenyan environmental activist and Nobel Peace Prize laureate. Her work with the Greenbelt movement, planting millions of trees across Africa, is a testament to the power of grassroots action.
She's a true inspiration. What wisdom did she have to offer?
Maathai believed that when we plant trees, we plant the seeds of peace and hope. It's a simple statement, but it's so profound, you know. It really captures the essence of her work.
It reminds us that environmental stewardship is about so much more than just protecting trees. It's about creating a more just and equitable world, fostering peace and nurturing hope for the future.
Exactly. It's about recognizing the interconnectedness of everything: people, planet, and prosperity. Now, let's switch gears and hear from Jochen Zeitz. He's the CEO of Harley-Davidson and has been a really strong advocate for integrating sustainability into the core of business practices.
It's not every day you hear a motorcycle company talking about sustainability. What's his take on it all?
Zeitz believes that sustainability is no longer just about doing less harm, it's about doing more good. He sees it as a fundamental shift in how businesses operate.
So it's not just about minimizing negative impacts. It's about actively creating positive change, both for the environment and for society.
Exactly. And this shift requires businesses to really integrate sustainability into every aspect of their operations, from their product design and supply chains to employee engagement and community partnerships.
It's about seeing sustainability as an opportunity, not a burden.
Right. It's about recognizing that doing good can also be good for business. Okay, now let's hear from someone who's been sounding the alarm about environmental issues for decades. David Suzuki. He's a renowned Canadian scientist and environmental activist.
Suzuki has a way of cutting through all the noise and getting straight to the heart of the matter. What's his message?
Suzuki reminds us that if we pollute the air, water, and soil that keep us alive and well and destroy the biodiversity that allows natural systems to function, no amount of money will save us.
It's a stark reminder that our health, our well-being, our very survival depends on a healthy planet.
Exactly. We can't just buy our way out of this problem. We need to fundamentally change our relationship with the natural world.
It's about recognizing that we are part of nature, not separate from it.
Right. Now let's turn to Janus Potočnik. He's co-chair of the UN International Resource Panel and has been a leading voice on the urgent need for a global transition to sustainable consumption and production patterns.
He has a really great global perspective on these challenges. What's his main takeaway?
Potočnik states that it is no longer whether a transformation towards global sustainable resource consumption is necessary, but how to urgently make it happen. He really emphasizes the need for immediate action.
So the debate is over. We know what needs to be done. The question is, how do we accelerate this transformation?
That's the challenge before us, and it requires a truly collective effort. We need governments, businesses, communities, and individuals all working together to shift our economies and societies toward those more sustainable pathways.
It's a call to action for all of us.
It is. And finally, let's end with some wisdom from Yvon Chouinard. He's the founder of Patagonia, a company that's known for its serious commitment to environmental and social responsibility.
Patagonia has definitely walked the walk when it comes to sustainability. What's Chouinard's philosophy?
Chouinard challenges us to embrace a simpler life, one based on sufficiency rather than excess. He says, going back to a simpler life based on sufficiency rather than excess is not a step backward.
It's a pretty radical idea in our consumer-driven world.
It is, but it makes us question our values.
Yeah.
You know, and our definition of progress. Do we really need all the stuff we accumulate? Can we find happiness and fulfillment in a life that's more in line with nature and our own basic needs?
It's a deep question for sure. And it brings us back to those key themes we've been talking about. The need to reduce our consumption, to embrace circular economy models, and to shift our mindset from one of scarcity to one of abundance. But abundance in terms of well-being, connection, and meaning.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that true wealth isn't found in material possessions, but in the health of our planet and the well-being of all people.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into sustainable resource management. We've covered so much, from the really sobering realities of resource scarcity to the inspiring examples of people working to create a more sustainable future. But the conversation definitely doesn't end here.
We really hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and inspired you to continue exploring these issues. Remember, we all have a role to play in creating a world where both people and the planet can thrive.
Thanks for joining us on this journey. Keep learning, keep questioning, and keep pushing for a better future. Until next time.